Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize Honorable Jervel Jinky Bitrics Luistro to avail of the privilege hour.
The Congresswoman from Batangas, the Honorable Jinky Luistro, whom I very much admire, is hereby recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand before you today to address matters of utmost importance that touches the integrity and accountability of our public financial system, the need to establish clear and stringent standards for the regulation of special disbursing officers, and the need for a law that clearly defines confidential funds, prescribing stricter requirements and guidelines in the utilization thereof. As we all know, the proper management of public funds is not just an issue of policy. Rather, it is an issue of national interest. Ang bawat piso po ay nanggagaling mula sa pinaghirapan at pinagpaguran ng mamamayang Pilipino. Bilang mga miyembro ng labing siyam na Kongreso ng Pilipinas, kinakailangan po nating masiguro na ang public funds, including confidential funds, ay ginagastos ng ayon sa batas. This statement, Mr. Chair, may be anchored with Article 11, Section 1 of the 1987 Constitution, which mandates that public office is a public trust. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, confidential funds have historically served as an essential instrument for the government in addressing matters that necessitate discretion, secrecy, and security. Such funds are imperative to ensure that the government possesses the necessary resources to protect the nation, safeguard its citizens, and preserve public order in the circumstances that demand confidentiality. However, Mr. Speaker, esteemed colleagues, while the importance of confidential funds is indisputable, we must also recognize the need to strike a delicate balance, one that maintains the integrity of our public financial system while safeguarding the people's trust in the government. These funds, by their very nature, are subject to strict scrutiny and concern. Our legal system enshrines the principle that procedural laws must align with substantive law, ensuring that rules are applied consistently with the fundamental objectives and values of our legal framework. However, there is currently no specific substantive law governing the creation, allocation, and use of confidential funds. Instead, Mr. Speaker, we rely on Joint Circular number 2015-01 issued by the Commission on Audit, which, while providing guidelines, is merely a procedural measure. It has become a common practice to allocate these funds, yet no substantive law clearly defines their scope or purpose. The only substantive law available is the constitutional mandate that all public funds are subject to public scrutiny. It is crucial to understand, as highlighted by legal experts, that procedural laws cannot function independently. They must be grounded on substantive law. Consequently, while COA's Joint Circular number 2015-01 serves as an operational guideline, it cannot replace a comprehensive law that clearly defines and governs confidential funds. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, esteemed colleagues, I echo the words of retired Supreme Court Associate Justice Antonio Carpio, who aptly pointed out that we lack clear and comprehensive legislation that properly defines and regulates confidential funds. Thus, Mr. Speaker, it has become incumbent upon this representation that while we provide the government with the necessary resources for national security through these confidential funds, we need to have a law that clearly defines these funds that shall be the basis of the imposition of strict and transparent guidelines to prevent the misuse, abuse, or neglect of the same. During the committee hearing investigations, we have established that there are gaps with regard to what encompasses confidential funds. It was shown that those who wield the power to disburse or approve of the same tends to abuse, misuse, or neglect. It is essential that we implement a unified framework for the disbursement of public funds, covering both confidential and even regular funds. This framework should include clear disbursement procedures, qualifications of special disbursing officers, and penalties for violations. Whether intentional or due to negligence, Mr. Speaker, there must be sufficient fidelity bond for the SDOs that will ensure that they will perform their duties faithfully and to account for all funds and properties in their possession. The SDOs and their agency heads must be jointly accountable for any mismanagement of funds. To emphasize, Mr. Speaker, esteemed colleagues, we must pass a law which, number one, defines confidential fund. Number two, provides disbursement procedure. Number three, provides auditing procedure. And number four, penalizes abuse, misuse, and neglect of the same. Equally important, Mr. Speaker, we must pass a law which, number one, upgrades the qualification of special disbursing officer. He or she must be a career official. And number two, mandates the posting of sufficient fidelity bond, which is enough to secure and to protect the total amount of public funds. Mr. Speaker, this power clearly rests with us, the Congress of the Philippines. It is incumbent upon this body to exercise its legislative authority to craft a law that will not only recognize confidential funds, but also set clear standards for their use, allocation, and even oversight. As lawmakers, it is our duty to ensure that these funds are utilized in a manner that is consistent with the public's interest and transparent to the extent possible without compromising the sensitivity of their intended purpose. In closing, Mr. Speaker, let us act urgently to implement the necessary legal chances that will safeguard public funds and ensure the government's confidential operations are effective, transparent, and accountable. Strengthening our financial systems will protect the public's hard-earned money and help build a more transparent and efficient government for the Filipino people. Mr. Speaker, this privileged speech is being delivered by this representation in anticipation of the bills on confidential fund and special disbursing officer, which will soon be filed by the Committee on Good Government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Congresswoman Luistro. And as a side note, this representation, Congresswoman Luistro, would like to be a co-author of the bills and measures that will be filed by your committee. Thank you very much for the privileged speech.